The morning sun peeked through the kitchen window as Susan Thompson flipped another pancake, humming an old tune her mother used to sing. The sweet smell of maple syrup filled the air, mixing with the aroma of fresh coffee. Today was special. Her son Tommy was graduating from high school, and nothing could spoil her mood. Not even the gentle hum of the alien monitoring drones that had become part of daily life over the past 15 years. Tommy came running down the stairs, his graduation robe draped over one arm. His dark hair was messy, just like his father's used to be. "Mom, have you seen my blue tie? The one Grandpa gave me." "Check the laundry room," Susan replied, sliding the last pancake onto a plate stacked high with others. "I ironed it yesterday." Her eyes caught the gleam of her old Marine Corps badge, displayed proudly on the shelf above the family photos. Sometimes it felt like another lifetime ago, before the hegemony arrived and changed everything. The aliens had come with their massive ships and advanced technology, declaring Earth a protected species reserve. They weren't cruel, just incredibly patronizing. They treated humans like clever pets who needed guidance and oversight. Susan had gone from being a decorated Marine to just another protected citizen overnight. Tommy returned with the tie, struggling to knot it properly. Susan wiped her hands on her apron and helped him, just like she had done countless times before. "Big day today," she said, straightening the tie. "First human ever accepted into the Hegemony Academy. Your father would have been so proud." "Do you think they'll really let me attend?" Tommy asked, his voice carrying a mix of hope and doubt. "Some of my friends say it's too good to be true." Susan squared his shoulders, looking him straight in the eyes. "You earned this. Your test scores were perfect, your application was flawless, and even their own evaluators said you're qualified. They can't go back on their word now." The kitchen display flickered to life, showing the morning news. The alien newsreader, a blue-skinned being with 4 eyes, was discussing the latest hegemony educational policies. Susan turned up the volume slightly, always keeping an ear out for any changes that might affect Tommy's future. "The hegemony continues to provide appropriate educational opportunities for all protected species," the newsreader announced in that typical condescending tone. "Remember, each species must develop at its natural pace for optimal societal harmony." Tommy grabbed a pancake and rolled it up, eating it like a burrito, a habit that always made Susan smile. "Mom, when you were in the Marines, did you ever think we'd end up like this? Being protected by aliens?" Susan poured herself another cup of coffee, considering her words carefully. "Life's full of surprises, kiddo. When I was fighting in desert storms, I never imagined I'd be making pancakes while alien drones flew past our window. But here's what I learned in the course. You adapt, you overcome, and you never, ever give up." Outside, the morning traffic was picking up. Regular cars mixed with the occasional alien hover vehicle, creating that strange blend of human and hegemony technology that had become normal. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for noon at the local high school field, one of the few places where the monitoring drones kept a respectful distance, thanks to an agreement about human cultural ceremonies. "You've got everything packed for the academy?" Susan asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the pride swelling in her chest. The acceptance package sat on the counter, its alien metallic surface reflecting rainbow patterns in the morning light. "Yes, Mom. Triple-checked everything last night." Tommy grinned, showing the same determination she'd seen in him since he was small. First human at the academy. Still feels unreal. Susan watched as her son gathered his things, remembering the tiny boy who used to play with toy spaceships, long before real ones appeared in their skies. Now he was going to be among those same stars, breaking barriers and making history, unless something went wrong. But she pushed that thought aside. She was a mother, a former Marine, and an optimist by necessity. The clock chimed 10, and Tommy hurried to finish his breakfast. Susan packed away the leftover pancakes, her movements precise and efficient. Old habits die hard. Today was going to be perfect. Her son was going to graduate, then head off to the stars to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. If only she knew what the afternoon would bring. The high school football field buzzed with excitement under the warm afternoon sun. Hundreds of chairs had been set up on the grass, and proud families filled them quickly. Susan sat in the third row, right next to the aisle, her camera ready to capture every moment. The hegemony had allowed the ceremony to proceed in the traditional human way, though their monitoring drones hovered at the edges of the field like silent witnesses. Tommy stood with his classmates, all in their blue graduation robes, waiting for their names to be called. He looked nervous but happy, occasionally glancing at his mom with a small wave. Susan noticed he kept touching the acceptance letter from the Hegemony Academy in his pocket, as if making sure it was still real. Principal Roberts stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying across the field through the speakers. "Welcome, families and friends, to this year's graduation ceremony." He paused, looking up at the sky, "and we thank our Hegemony observers for allowing us to continue this important human tradition." The ceremony proceeded smoothly at first. Students walked across the stage one by one, receiving their diplomas with proud smiles. Parents cheered, cameras flashed, and even the weather seemed perfect. Susan kept her camera ready, waiting for Tommy's moment. Then everything changed. 3 Hegemony officials appeared at the side of the stage in their shimmering transport beam. They were tall, blue-skinned beings wearing their formal silver robes. The ceremony stopped as Principal Roberts stepped aside, clearly surprised by their arrival. One of the aliens stepped forward, their 4 eyes scanning the crowd. "We apologize for this interruption," the lead official said, their translator making the words sound flat and emotionless. "We must address an urgent matter regarding human educational protocols." Susan felt her stomach tighten. She watched Tommy's face change from confusion to worry. The alien continued speaking, each word falling like heavy stones in the sudden silence. "It has come to our attention that a clerical error was made regarding human advancement opportunities. After careful review by the Education Council, we must announce that humans are not yet ready for integration into higher hegemony institutions." The crowd began to murmur. Susan stood up, her hands clenching into fists. The alien's words cut through the growing noise. "All previous acceptances to hegemony educational facilities are hereby revoked. This is for the protection and proper development of the human species. We thank you for your understanding." Tommy stepped forward from the line of students. "But sir, I have my acceptance letter right here. I passed all the tests. I met every requirement." The alien turned all 4 eyes toward Tommy, their expression something between pity and amusement. "Young human, you must understand. Your species needs time to develop properly. This is for your own good." Susan couldn't take it anymore. She moved into the aisle, her marine training evident in her straight posture and steady voice. "My son earned his place at that academy. You can't just change the rules because you suddenly decided we're not ready." The alien official blinked slowly, regarding Susan with what looked like gentle condescension. "Ah, a concerned parent. Your protective instinct is admirable, but unnecessary. The hegemony knows what is best for developing species." Other parents began standing up too, voices rising in protest. The alien officials remained unmoved, their technological superiority evident in their casual dismissal of human concerns. They acted as if they were dealing with children throwing a tantrum. "The decision is final," the lead official announced. "All humans will continue their education on Earth where they belong. This ceremony may now continue." They vanished in another transport beam, leaving chaos in their wake. Tommy stood on stage, the acceptance letter crumpled in his hand, his dreams literally disappearing before his eyes. Susan watched as her son's shoulders slumped, and something inside her snapped. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of her fellow Marines when they were told to stand down as the hegemony took control. But this time was different. This time they hadn't just insulted her species or her planet. They had hurt her son. As the confused crowd buzzed around her, Susan Thompson made a decision. The hegemony might think they knew everything about humans, but they had just made a crucial mistake. They had never dealt with a determined human mother whose child had been wronged. And they were about to learn why that was a very, very bad idea. The soft glow of computer screens lit up Susan's living room as she sat surrounded by datapads and notebooks. 3 days had passed since the graduation ceremony, and she hadn't wasted a single minute. Tommy's acceptance letter lay on the coffee table, a constant reminder of why she wasn't giving up. "Mom, you need to sleep," Tommy said, bringing her a cup of coffee. He had been watching her work for hours, worried but also amazed by her dedication. The circles under her eyes were dark, but her focus never wavered. "Sleep is for people who aren't fighting an empire," Susan replied, taking a sip of coffee. She had turned their living room into what looked like a command center. Her old Marine training had kicked in. When faced with a powerful enemy, gather intelligence first. The hegemony's public database was massive, and most humans never bothered to read it all. But Susan had discovered something interesting. The aliens were obsessed with rules and documentation. Every decision, every policy, and every exception had to be recorded somewhere. Her tablet pinged with another notification. A new document had been automatically translated from the alien language. Susan had set up searches for keywords like species advancement, educational rights, and protection protocols. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a section of text. Tommy leaned in to read. "It's from their original charter. All species under hegemony protection retain the right to petition for advancement if they can demonstrate sufficient cultural sophistication." Tommy's eyes widened. "Does that mean?" "It means they broke their own rules," Susan said, her voice firm. "They can't just decide we're not ready without giving us a chance to prove otherwise. They have to follow their own procedures." She pulled up another document, this one showing statistics about other alien species that had successfully petitioned for greater rights. Each case had one thing in common. They had used the hegemony's own bureaucracy against them. Outside, a monitoring drone drifted past the window. Susan barely noticed it anymore. She was too busy copying down relevant regulations and cross-referencing them with Earth's achievements. Her dining room table was covered with printouts showing human art, science, literature, and innovation. "But Mom," Tommy said, picking up one of the papers, "if other humans have tried this before." "They haven't," Susan interrupted, her eyes still scanning documents. "I checked. Everyone just accepted what the hegemony told them. No one ever filed a formal petition using their own legal system." She stood up and walked to her old Marine Corps trunk in the corner. Opening it, she pulled out a worn notebook, her old training manual. "You know what they taught us. Know your enemy better than they know themselves. The hegemony thinks they know humans, but they only see what they expect to see." The next few hours were spent organizing evidence. Susan created categories: technological advancement, cultural achievements, social development, and most importantly, examples of human adaptability. She remembered how her Marine unit had once reorganized their entire strategy in the middle of a sandstorm. Humans were good at adapting. Really good. A message flashed across her main screen, another translated document. This one made her smile for the first time in days. "Got it," she whispered, quickly saving the file. "What is it?" Tommy asked, moving to look over her shoulder. "The official petition format. Every species has the right to submit one, but it has to be perfect. One mistake and they can dismiss it without review." Susan's fingers flew across the keyboard, copying the exact format. "And guess what? There's no rule saying a single human can't file on behalf of the entire species." Tommy stared at his mother, seeing something new in her expression. It wasn't just determination anymore, it was certainty. "You really think this will work?" Susan turned to face her son, her voice steady and sure. "The hegemony loves their rules because they think other species are too simple to understand them. But they forgot something important about humans." She picked up the crumpled acceptance letter from the table. "We've been filling out paperwork and dealing with bureaucracy since before they ever found us. And nobody, is better at finding loopholes than a mother trying to help her child. The sun was starting to rise, marking the beginning of day 4. Susan Thompson, former Marine and current mother on a mission, allowed herself a small smile. The hegemony was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun or a spaceship, it was a parent armed with the right documents. The hegemony local administration building towered over the city, its strange curved architecture making it look like a giant twisted crystal. Susan walked through the front doors, her back straight, wearing her best business suit. Tommy walked beside her, carrying a large box filled with carefully organized documents. The alien receptionist looked up as they approached, all 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "How may we assist you today, protected citizens?" Susan placed a thick folder on the counter. "I'm here to submit a formal petition for species advancement review under Charter Section 47, Subsection 12, Paragraph 3 of the Hegemony Protection Protocol." The receptionist's eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of surprise that Susan had learned to recognize. "That is unusual. Humans don't typically." "The Charter clearly states that any protected species may petition." Susan interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "I have the required forms, supporting documentation, and evidence as specified in Regulation 15B. Other humans in the lobby stopped to watch. Nobody had ever seen someone speak to a hegemony official this way. The receptionist's fingers moved over their floating screen, checking regulations. "This is technically correct," they admitted. "However, I must inform my superiors." "Of course," Susan smiled. "That's exactly what Protocol 22A requires for non-standard submissions." A few minutes later, 3 senior officials hurried into the lobby. Susan recognized one of them from the graduation ceremony. They huddled with the receptionist, speaking in their own language while glancing at Susan and Tommy. Finally, the tallest official approached. "Mrs. Thompson, this is most irregular. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "Thank you, but no," Susan replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The Charter specifically states that all petition submissions must be processed through standard public channels to ensure transparency." The official's skin turned a darker shade of blue, their version of a frown. "You seem very well versed in our regulations." "I am," Susan agreed. "I'm also live streaming this interaction to 50 different human news channels." She gestured to the small pin on her lapel, a standard recording device that the hegemony themselves had approved for human use. The lobby had grown very quiet. The official looked around, noticing the growing crowd of humans recording with their phones. Some were already posting to social media. The story of a human mother challenging the hegemony with their own rules was spreading fast. "Very well," the official said stiffly. "We will accept your petition for review." They reached for the folder. "One moment." Susan held up a hand. "Tommy, the verification forms, please." Tommy pulled out another set of documents. "According to Section 89C, we need 3 copies, stamped and verified, with all appendices attached, and a receipt of submission." The official's translator crackled as they switched to their native language, clearly frustrated. But they couldn't refuse. Every step Susan and Tommy requested was clearly outlined in hegemony law. For 2 hours, they stood in the lobby as each document was processed, stamped, and recorded. More humans gathered outside the building. News drones hovered near the windows. By the time the last form was stamped, Susan's petition had become the most watched event in recent human history. "Your petition will be reviewed within standard processing time," the official announced. "You may expect a response in approximately 3 lunar cycles." Actually, Susan smiled again, pulling out one last document. Under Emergency Review Statute 7, any petition involving educational rights must be processed within 1 standard solar week when submitted by a guardian on behalf of an affected minor. The official stared at her, all 4 eyes wide. They checked their records, and their skin turned an even darker blue. She was right. Again. As they left the building, Tommy looked at his mother with newfound awe. "They're actually going to have to review it. They can't ignore us anymore." Susan nodded, watching as humans gathered around them, asking questions and taking pictures. "The hegemony thinks they're teaching us to be civilized," she said, "but they forgot that humans wrote the book on using rules and regulations to fight for what's right." Her phone buzzed continuously as messages poured in from other parents, teachers, and supporters. The news was spreading across the globe. One human mother had found a way to challenge the mighty hegemony, armed with nothing but paperwork and determination. That night, as Susan and Tommy watched the stories spread across every news channel, a message arrived from the Hegemony Council itself. The petition had been fast-tracked for immediate review. The message ended with a note that made both of them laugh out loud. Petition processing expedited due to unexpected volume of public interest. Additional security measures implemented to handle unprecedented number of document requests from human population. The hegemony was about to learn another important lesson about humans. Nothing spreads faster than the story of someone beating the system at its own game. The Great Hall of the Hegemony Council stretched up into darkness, its walls shimmering with strange lights. Susan stood at the center of the circular floor, surrounded by tier upon tier of alien officials from 100 different worlds. Tommy sat in the human observation area with hundreds of others who had come to watch. The hearing was being broadcast across Earth and to every hegemony world. "You may begin your presentation, Human Thompson," the chief counselor announced from high above. Their voice echoed through the vast chamber. Susan touched the control panel in front of her, and the hall's holographic system came to life. "Honorable Council, I stand before you not just as a mother, but as a representative of humanity's potential." Images began to float in the air around her. The Great Pyramids, the International Space Station, the first human moon landing. "You call us a protected species, but look at what we accomplished before you ever found us." She moved through her presentation with military precision, each point backed by careful research. Humans went from first flight to landing on our moon in just 66 years. We cured diseases that once killed millions. We created art that still moves people to tears. The council members watched, their expressions unreadable. Susan continued, bringing up new images. "You say we're not ready for advanced education, but look at how we learn." The holograms showed human children figuring out complex puzzles, teenagers building robots, students solving mathematical equations. We don't just memorize, we innovate. We don't just follow rules, we understand why they exist and how to improve them. One council member leaned forward. "But your species is prone to conflict. You fight among yourselves." "Yes," Susan agreed, surprising them with her honesty. "We fight, but we also forgive. We rebuild. We learn." She brought up images of former enemies becoming allies, of peace treaties and humanitarian aid. "Our capacity for conflict is matched by our capacity for compassion." The holograms changed to show human parents teaching children, doctors treating patients, rescue workers saving lives. "You see our conflicts and think we're dangerous, but you miss seeing how those same strong emotions drive us to protect, to nurture, to improve." She pulled up the hegemony's own educational standards. "Your requirements for advanced education don't just ask for intelligence. They ask for creativity, adaptability, and understanding. Humanity has these in abundance." The chamber had grown very quiet. Even the most dismissive council members were paying attention now. Susan brought up her final set of images, human achievements since the hegemony arrived. "In just 15 years under your protection, we've learned your languages, adapted to your technology, and found ways to combine our knowledge with yours. We didn't do this because you taught us. We did it because learning and growing is what humans do best." She turned to face the highest tier where the chief counselor sat. "You want proof we're ready? Look around this room. I'm standing here because I read and understood your entire legal code. I followed your procedures perfectly. I organized evidence according to your standards, and I did it all in less than a week." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Susan wasn't finished. "But the most important proof isn't in these holograms. It's in why I'm here. Humans don't just seek knowledge for ourselves. We fight to give our children better opportunities than we had. That dedication to the next generation has driven every major advancement in our history. She gestured to where Tommy sat. My son earned his place in your academy. Not because he's exceptional, though he is, but because he represents what every human child could achieve if given the chance. By denying him, you're not protecting us. You're holding back an entire species that's ready and eager to learn. The chief counselor raised all four hands for silence. You speak well, Human Thompson, but passionate speeches alone cannot. Oh, I'm not finished, Susan interrupted, her voice steady. She pulled a small data crystal from her pocket, the kind the hegemony used for their most secure files, because while researching our petition, I found something interesting about why the education ban was really put in place. The crystal glowed as she held it up. Would the council like to see the evidence of certain officials accepting bribes to keep humans restricted? Or should we move directly to discussing our terms for keeping this information private? The great hall erupted in chaos. Susan stood calmly in the center, a small smile on her face. Sometimes the best weapon wasn't the evidence you presented. It was the evidence you held back until just the right moment. The council chamber had erupted into a storm of voices, some shouting in dozens of alien languages. The data crystal in Susan's hand continued to glow softly, drawing every eye in the vast hall. Security drones hovered closer, but Susan stood her ground, calm as she'd been in any combat situation. This is outrageous. One of the lower-ranked council members jumped up, their scales bristling. How dare a protected species threaten the council? Threaten. Susan's voice carried clearly through the chaos. I'm simply following Hegemony Transparency Protocol 355, which requires reporting of suspected corruption. Would you prefer I release this evidence publicly instead? The chief counselor's skin had turned almost white, a sign of extreme distress in their species. They raised all four hands again, and silence slowly returned to the chamber. Human Thompson, surely we can discuss this matter privately. With all due respect, Susan replied. I believe we've had enough private discussions. The evidence shows that 6 high-ranking education officials have been taking payments from various sources to keep humans restricted to Earth. They argued we weren't ready while personally profiting from our containment. Tommy stood up in the observation area, holding another data crystal. And I have a backup copy, already set to automatically upload to every news network in the hegemony if anything happens to my mom. Susan allowed herself a small smile. Her son had learned well. The council members looked at each other, their usual confidence shattered. One of them, an older alien with silvery skin, leaned forward. How did you even access these records? They should have been secure. You gave us access to your technology, but didn't think we'd learn how to use it properly, Susan explained. Humans are very good at finding things people try to hide, especially mothers looking out for their children. The chief counselor had been quietly consulting with others on the highest tier. Finally, they spoke. What exactly do you want, Human Thompson? The same thing I wanted when I filed the petition. Fair treatment for humanity. Susan brought up the holograms again, this time showing the corrupt officials' financial records. Remove these individuals from their positions. End the education ban. Allow qualified humans to attend any hegemony institution they're capable of getting into. She paused, looking around the chamber. And one more thing. I want humanity to have representation on the Education Council, someone who can make sure this never happens again. More murmurs filled the chamber, but they were different now, thoughtful rather than angry. The chief counselor spoke quietly with their advisors, then straightened to their full height. You realize, Human Thompson, that if we agree to this, it will change everything. Other protected species will demand similar rights. Good, Susan replied firmly. Maybe it's time the hegemony remembered its original purpose, to help species develop, not hold them back. A younger council member stood up. I second this. The evidence of corruption must be investigated, and the humans' points about education are valid. Support began building through the chamber. More council members stood, adding their voices. The chief counselor watched it all, their 4 eyes blinking rapidly as they calculated political implications. Finally, they spoke. "We will need time to verify the evidence and make appropriate changes to our policies." "You have 24 hours, Susan replied. "After that, every news outlet in the hegemony gets copies of these records. I believe in transparency, after all." The chamber grew quiet again. The chief counselor's skin slowly returned to its normal blue. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Human Thompson." "Neither," Susan answered. "I'm just a mother who did her homework, something your empire should have thought about before making my son cry at his graduation." The chief counselor actually laughed, a sound rarely heard in the Great Hall. "Perhaps we have underestimated humans after all. Very well. The council will reconvene tomorrow to announce our decision. But I suspect, Human Thompson, you already know what it will be." As Susan left the chamber, other alien species representatives crowded around her, asking questions about her research methods. She caught Tommy's proud grin from across the room. The hegemony had thought they were dealing with simple, underdeveloped creatures. Instead, they'd gotten a lesson in why you should never underestimate a species that had perfected the art of fighting bureaucracy with bureaucracy. And more importantly, why you should never, ever make an enemy of someone's mom. 3 months later, Susan stood at the landing pad of the Hegemony Academy, watching as new students arrived from dozens of different worlds. The massive school complex stretched across an artificial island floating in the sky, its crystal towers gleaming in the light of 2 suns. Tommy stood beside her, wearing his new student uniform and practically bouncing with excitement. "Hard to believe all this started because they tried to take away your acceptance letter," Susan said, straightening his collar one last time. "Old mom habits died hard, even on alien worlds." Tommy grinned. "Hard to believe my mom ended up changing the whole empire because of it." He wasn't exaggerating. The corruption scandal had shaken the hegemony to its core. 6 high-ranking officials had been removed and were facing charges. The education ban had been lifted not just for humans, but for all species previously labeled as not ready. And Susan Thompson, former Marine and unstoppable mother, had become the first human member of the Hegemony Education Council. A group of alien students walked past, nodding respectfully to Susan. Some were from species that had been protected even longer than humans. Now they too had a chance to prove themselves. The Academy's enrollment had doubled in the past 3 months. "Council Member Thompson," a voice called out. Susan turned to see one of her new colleagues, a tall crystalline being who had supported her reforms from the start. "The orientation ceremony is about to begin." "Go on," Susan told Tommy, giving him a quick hug. "Make us proud." "Already did that," Tommy replied with a smile, "by having the galaxy's most terrifying mom." Susan watched as her son joined the crowd of new students heading toward the orientation hall. Another parent, a floating gas-based life form, drifted closer to her. "Is it true?" they asked through their translator. "Did you really defeat the old council with nothing but documents?" "Knowledge is power," Susan replied, "especially when your opponents think you're too simple to understand their own rules." The Academy's main hall was packed with students and parents from across the galaxy. Susan took her place on the stage with other council members, remembering how different things had been just 3 months ago. Now she sat where the corrupt officials once had, but with a very different mission. The chief counselor, who had become an unexpected ally, stepped up to the podium. "Welcome to the first truly open enrollment period in hegemony history. Today we recognize that advancement comes not from protection, but from opportunity." Susan looked out at the crowd. Humans sat next to silicon-based life forms. Crystalline beings chatted with energy creatures. Every one of them had earned their place here, just as Tommy had. After the ceremony, Susan found Tommy talking with a group of mixed-species students. They were comparing notes on their entrance exams and sharing stories about their worlds. This, she realized, was what the hegemony should have been all along. Not an empire of rules and restrictions, but a place where different species could learn from each other. "Mom," Tommy called out, "my new friends want to know if you're really starting a parent advocacy group for all species." Susan smiled. During her fight with the council, other parents had reached out to her, sharing similar stories of restrictions and roadblocks. Now they were working together, making sure no empire would ever again underestimate the power of determined parents. "The hegemony is about to learn that human moms aren't even the scariest ones out there," she said, nodding to a group of parents nearby. One was a warrior from a gravity-heavy world who had carried her children through acid storms to reach testing centers. Another was a hive mind mother who had spent 50 years fighting for her colony's education rights. As the sun set, casting rainbow lights through the Academy's crystal towers, Susan thought about how far they'd come. The hegemony had thought they were protecting lesser species, but they had really been protecting themselves. From change, from challenge, from growth. "Ready to start classes tomorrow?" she asked Tommy as they watched ships coming and going from the landing pad. "Ready," he nodded. "Though I don't think anything they teach here will be as educational as watching you take on an empire." Susan laughed. "Just remember the most important lesson from all this, kiddo." I know," Tommy grinned. "Never mess with a human mother who knows how to read the fine print." Above them, the stars twinkled with new possibility. The hegemony had made one simple mistake. They had made a human mother angry. In doing so, they had accidentally created something far more powerful than any empire. A universe where every parent could fight for their children's future, and every child had the chance to reach for the stars.